Last night, at some point around 3 in the morning, you might have opened your eyes in the dark. Your mind was clear, not groggy, not confused, just awake. You probably assumed something was wrong with you. You checked your phone, felt a flicker of panic about tomorrow, and tried to force yourself back to sleep. But what if nothing was wrong at all? What if your body was doing exactly what human bodies did for most of history? For almost the entire span of human existence, sleeping in one unbroken 8-hour block was not the norm. It was the exception. And the version of sleep you've been taught to expect, the version you feel guilty about failing to achieve, is barely 2 centuries old. To understand what's actually happening at 3 in the morning, you have to go back before electric light, before factories, before clocks dictated when a body was allowed to rest. You have to go back to a world where night was simply dark, and dark lasted a long time. Historian A. Roger Ekirch spent over a decade combing through diaries, court records, medical texts, and literature from pre-industrial Europe. He wasn't looking for sleep patterns at first. He stumbled onto something strange. Again and again, ordinary documents referenced 2 distinct periods of sleep in a single night. People wrote about their first sleep and their second sleep as if everyone already knew what that meant. Nobody explained it because nobody needed to. It was simply how nights worked. According to Ekirch's research, a typical pre-industrial night looked something like this. As darkness fell, people went to bed, not long after sunset. They slept for 3 or 4 hours. Then, sometime around midnight, they woke up. Not briefly, not in a panic. They woke up fully, for an hour or more, in the middle of the night. And what did they do during that waking hour? Ordinary things. They got up and tended the fire. They talked quietly with a spouse. They prayed. Some read. Some had sex. Midwives reported that conception was considered especially likely during this window because couples were relaxed, unhurried, and undisturbed by the demands of the coming day. Then, after this waking period, people lay back down for a second sleep that carried them through until morning. This wasn't rare or occasional. Ekirch found references to segmented sleep across centuries and across social classes, from peasants to aristocrats. It appeared in the writings of Homer. It showed up in French and English literature well into the 1800s. It was so unremarkable that it barely needed a name. So if this pattern was universal for so long, why does almost nobody talk about it today? Why does waking at 3 a.m. now feel like a malfunction instead of a feature? The answer has less to do with biology and more to do with light. In the late 1990s, psychiatrist Thomas Wehr ran an experiment at the National Institute of Mental Health that quietly confirmed what Ekirch had found buried in old documents. Wehr took a group of subjects and placed them in an environment with 14 hours of darkness a night, mimicking the natural darkness of a pre-industrial winter, with no artificial light to interrupt it, no screens, no lamps, just the length of night nature intended. At first, the subjects slept how modern people sleep, in one long stretch, because that pattern was deeply ingrained. But within a few weeks, something shifted. Their sleep split. They began falling asleep for a few hours, waking calmly in the middle of the night for an hour or two, and then sleeping again until morning. Their bodies, freed from artificial light, rediscovered the exact rhythm Ekirch had found in centuries-old diaries. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a body returning to a default setting that modern life had simply overridden. So what actually changed? Why did an entire species abandon a sleep pattern it had followed for thousands of years? The shift happened gradually, then all at once. Cheap, reliable artificial light began spreading through cities in the late 1800s. Streetlights extended the useful hours of the evening. Gas lamps, and later electric bulbs, meant darkness no longer forced the body into rest. Around the same time, industrial work schedules demanded something sleep had never been asked to provide before: a single, efficient, uninterrupted block of unconsciousness that fit neatly between 2 shifts. A segmented night with an hour of quiet wakefulness in the middle didn't fit a factory clock. Employers didn't want workers who slept in 2 shifts. They wanted workers who slept once, woke up, and showed up on time. Over a few generations, the language for first sleep and second sleep faded from use because the pattern itself faded from lived experience. By the 20th century, unbroken 8-hour sleep wasn't just common. It had quietly become the only version of normal sleep. Charles Geisler, who has spent decades studying how light exposure shapes the body's internal clock at Harvard Medical School, has shown just how sensitive human biology still is to artificial light, even now. Exposure to bright light in the evening, especially the blue-toned light of screens, suppresses the release of melatonin and delays the body's natural signal to wind down. In other words, the same modern light that erased segmented sleep 2 centuries ago is still actively working against your body's older rhythms every single night. This reframes something important. That 3 a.m. wake-up you've spent years treating as a symptom might actually be an echo, a faint biological memory of a rhythm your ancestors lived by for millennia, resurfacing in a world that no longer has any patience for it. That doesn't mean every case of middle-of-the-night waking is harmless. Chronic insomnia, stress-driven waking, and sleep disorders are real, and they deserve real attention. But for a specific, very common experience, waking calmly around the same time each night, lying there for 20 or 30 minutes with a clear mind, then drifting back off without much trouble, there may be nothing broken at all. Consider what usually happens instead. The lights go on, the phone comes out, the mind starts calculating hours of sleep lost, cortisol rising with every glance at the clock. The very anxiety about not sleeping becomes the thing that keeps you from sleeping. Your ancestors waking during that same hour felt none of that pressure because nothing had ever told them the waking itself was a problem. Sleep researcher Russell Foster, who studies the neuroscience of circadian rhythms at Oxford, has pointed out that modern sleep anxiety is, in many cases, a bigger disruptor of rest than the waking itself. The expectation of a perfect, unbroken 8 hours creates a kind of performance pressure around sleep that simply didn't exist for most of human history. People weren't measuring sleep efficiency. They were just living inside the rhythm their bodies gave them. So the next time you open your eyes in the dark and the house is quiet and your mind feels strangely clear, you might not be encountering a flaw in your biology. You might be meeting a version of yourself that your ancestors would have recognized instantly. A version that used that hour to think, to rest without pressure, to simply exist in the dark before returning to sleep. Tonight, when you flip the switch and flood your room with light, remember that darkness itself used to be enough to guide the body through the night, in 2 gentle pieces instead of 1 forced block. And the next time 3 a.m. finds you awake, staring at the ceiling instead of your phone, you won't have to wonder what's wrong with you. You'll know exactly what your body is doing. It's not broken sleep. It's ancient sleep, quietly resurfacing in a world that forgot it was ever there.